How's it going, everybody? It's been a couple weeks, and I'm back, and here to talk with my hands some more. Well, mostly the past 2 weeks has been spent finishing out the artwork for the diamond mine, which I talked a little bit about on the last video. So artwork-wise, other than the indirect lighting, because I kind of realized about halfway through doing that area that the obviously there's like a shadow that's going to cast in from, because this is down in this crater, and so most of the area is going to be in shadow. So I kind of, if I want it to look okay, I need to do indirect lighting work there. So that part's not done, but at a baseline the art is done. So there's what that looks like. And so now I've been kind of implementing that into the game. You might ask, why start implementing it into the game before you've done the indirect lighting pass? Well, mostly that's because when it goes from kind of the abstract world of just like doing all the art in a paint program to doing it in the game, there end up being changes that need to be made and adjustments and stuff. So it's kind of easier to do that first and then focus on like doing the, I guess, what I would consider a polished detail of adding in lighting. So anyway, so that's what I've been doing. I still haven't really started work on the trailer in earnest. It's kind of been a funny thing. I've been watching a lot of other indie developers either launch their games or at least put out trailers for their games in the past several months whilst I kind of procrastinate on that point. So I really do need to seriously start doing that. In any case, if I talk about it enough, I don't have to do it. But anyway, so I did have like a little bit of a topic of the week, although it's not like super prepped, so I'm not sure how much I'll get out of it. But there was something that kind of like came up on Twitter about game design for once that was a little bit interesting to me, so I threw in my 2 cents there, but I thought I might like to elaborate on it. So that thing is kind of the concept of, well, I guess I should say topic of the week, shouldn't I? Anyway, so that thing that I wanted to talk about was game length, and like more specifically, like what constitutes a game being too long or too short or whatever. And generally speaking, I think, the original tweet was kind of talking about how maybe a big problem with, I think it was kind of tying into the cyberpunk crunch thing and just talking about crunch in general in the game industry and stuff, and that maybe game developers would crunch less if games were only 5 hours long instead of like 20 to 100 hours long. And that maybe then games would be better at a shorter length, right? I think the quoted time was like 3 hours. If like the average length of a game was 3 hours, that maybe that would, like, how would that affect the game industry? And so that my immediate response to that was that I didn't really think focusing on just length in the abstract or without any other kind of qualifications, I didn't necessarily think that was the thing to focus on. I think that there's a balance between, I guess, quantity and quality is kind of the way to put it, but there's definitely a balance between how much original and new ideas there are versus the length. Obviously, the token example I can go to with this is The Witness, which is like an 100 to 200 hour game that is very densely packed with interesting ideas for that whole length, and so I would never want that game to be shorter. Versus on the other hand, you would talk about probably most RPGs, where you kind of have a system that's deep enough to be interesting, but then that gets stretched out over like 100 hours of gameplay and is not. It almost never is still interesting by the end of the 100 hours, and usually it's kind of that the gameplay is more padding for a story that's maintaining your interest for those types of games. So it's sort of a balance between those two things that like, well, the story's interesting, but the gameplay is kind of wearing out its welcome. So I'm going to power through the gameplay that I don't like so they can get to the story and see the end of it or whatever. So I think that type of thing happens a lot with games where they just kind of took an idea that is interesting and could be fun and then stretch that out. If I was looking at what I think probably most games' length should be in the neighborhood of, I would say probably 5 hours. Most games don't have more original ideas than what would fill 5 hours. I would say many games have less, so in that sense I might agree with the original tweet about a game being 2 to 3 hours long, but you obviously have to lower the price of games if you're only going to make a 2 or 3 hour game. You can't charge people $60 for 3 hours. It's kind of ridiculous. I guess people do, but generally speaking, I think that's the reason that there's a drive in the industry to make 100-hour games or 20-hour games or whatever, is because you're charging so much for the game that people would rather have a game that's padded out and takes up a lot of time than finish the game in a short period of time. Personally, I am of the standpoint that I'd rather have a shorter game that I feel like playing again than have a longer game that I get tired of before I get to the end of it. I think a big one that I kind of missed the mark on here was Doom, because I did my video essay about Doom, which you should watch, and I'll link one of these corners if you haven't seen it before. And I still mostly agree with my viewpoint on that game in that it was really a refreshing move away from kind of what shooters had become over the past 20 years, really, and back towards something that was a little more frenetic and felt more like the original Doom. However, I had not finished the game at the point of doing that video essay on it, and I still have not finished the game as of this recording, so that leads into kind of my point about Doom, which is I kind of think it's too long, and I kind of think that it wears out its welcome, and I kind of think there's not enough variety in the gameplay as it is to really stretch it out for as long as the game is. I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but I think I've played like close to 20 hours, and I don't really know when it's going to end, but it's still going. So I don't think the game needed to be that long. I think that would have been a game that would have been fine to be 10 hours long or something, right? In any case, I'm rambling a bit, but it's just to give an example, another example of a game that I think kind of overstays its welcome. It's still a good game, but it could be shorter, and it probably would have been a better game for that if they had made, let's say, less levels, but spent more time making those levels more replayable. So I feel like I should think of another example of a game that's long, but doesn't feel like it's a waste of time or like it's overly stretched out. But nothing really is coming to mind right now, because the vast majority of games that are long games do have that problem of being really padded out to reach that length. So in any case, I think it still stands, the tweet, which was not my tweet. I will post it up here so you can see. I still think that general point stands, that most games are ridiculously long, and people outside of the game industry are probably surprised by how long games are if they don't, people don't play games. And that is kind of why games have a reputation for being a waste of time. Yeah, I mean, I think most of the time, something else that's coming to mind is like multiplayer games. Obviously, multiplayer games are very dense and very deep. If you're playing them for hundreds of hours, you get a lot out of just the game, and there's nothing else there, like something like PUBG or Counter-Strike or, well, those are the ones that come to mind of games that have a lot of depth. Spy Party is another one. Have a lot of depth if you're going to play many, many, many hours of them. It's not really stretching that out because you're kind of peeling back layers on the same thing and learning new things as you go. Anyway, with that said, I've rambled enough on the topic of how long should games be or not be, and that'll pretty much do it for this devlog. This was really very short on a devlog standpoint and long on a topic of the week standpoint, because there's really not that much to say about doing artwork for a game. It's like you're just doing the artwork. It's like, what is there to say? I mean, there were not any super surprising challenges that I ran into doing the art, so at least for this area. So anyway, as I said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Obviously, if you're not following the game over on Twitter, that's at Taiji Game on Twitter, and it's also Taiji Game on Instagram, so you can follow it there. Wishlist the game on Steam if you haven't already. If you're wondering what the heck even is this game, here's a card that links to the, wherever it goes, links to the devlog that talks about that. And I'll try to get a trailer done. Let's set the deadline into the month. I need to get this trailer done. Anyway, have a good one, everybody. I'll see you then.